is the Kev Baker Show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome back. I'm your host, Kev Baker, for the next 2 hours right here on the Kev Baker Show on your number one network, Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com. For a lovely weekend, so I have recharged the batteries out sunning myself today in Glasgow in May. That's almost unheard of, but I suppose maybe that's one of the shine. A lot of noise coming from our guest here. 2 secs. That's it. The noise has gone away now. But yeah, the one kind of ray of shining light, if you pardon the pun, that seems to be coming from all the geoengineering that's going on would appear to be that we're now getting warm days in Glasgow in May. I can live with that. I really, really can. Now, coming up later on this week on the Kev Baker Show, we have got Duncan Campbell. He is going to be on with us on Wednesday night. And then on Thursday night, I'm going to be joined by Max Egan. That's right, Max is going to be coming back on the show. And we'll be spending a couple of hours trying to put the world to rights. Now, I don't know what's happening with my guest. I don't know if there's like some tornado blowing through but getting some really bad feedback from you there, Charlie. And that's right, tonight, folks, I am not on my own. I do have a guest with me. And you know, it's funny how things work. Synchronicity. I'll cut that off just now, but it's almost like synchronicity, because it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about Geordie Rose, right? And Geordie Rose, the guy behind the D-Wave computer, he put on a presentation. Now, it was a very kind of special presentation from my point of view, because in the background of the introduction to his presentation, what was there was a thumbnail from Freaky Friday, right? And Geordie was pointing out the fact that there was crazy conspiracies flying about his quantum computer. But what he went on to talk about later on in that interview was the fact that his quantum computer is piercing holes into other dimensions. And instead of the demons that Elon Musk warns about, he says to get ready for things akin to what H.P. Lovecraft used to write about. Now, he mentioned the ancient ones and the old ones, but something else that Lovecraft used to write about was something called Cthulhu. Now, Cthulhu, for lack of a better term and way of describing it, is like an octopus. And then just recently on the show, I had Nick Redford talking about the Slender Man, and many depictions of the Slender Man itself looks like this giant octopus. And that's why I was kind of taken aback when I was contacted by an author who is going to in just a moment on the show. I don't know what the audio noises are coming from his PC right now, but
can you hear me, Kev?
I can hear you. I can hear you, Charlie. I don't know if you're in a tornado or something going on there right now.
I'm sitting at my desk. Normally, they wait till I talk about the Las Vegas shooting before they mess up my Skype.
Yeah, some crazy noises going on. But before I come to you, let me just introduce what we're going to be getting into tonight, because here I have been talking about octopuses in its various forms, be it Slender Man, Geordie Rose, Cthulhu. And then I have somebody called Charlie Robinson email me out the blue. And he was telling me he's the author of a book called The Octopus of Global Control. A controversial and humorous book that takes quotes from over 500 witnesses to some of history's greatest events and uses them to piece together and expose a century-long plan for world domination. He had a front row seat to the fraud and corruption in the mortgage industry during his career in the Las Vegas real estate. And he credits John Perkins' book, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, as the final piece of the puzzle that helped him to really see how the American government operates as the enforcement arm for a multinational companies. And this is where we're going to get into the Octopus of Global Control. Now, I'm going to bring Charlie back onto the call now, and hopefully now that we're getting right into it, Charlie will be live with us. But this show tonight, folks, these kind of topics that we're going to be covering, these are ideal kind of topics to bring.
There?
There we are, sir. Charlie, sorry for that long-winded introduction, but we finally got you on, and I don't know what. Can you hear me, Charlie?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir. It looks like we're going to have some problems with this show tonight, but we'll persevere, man. We will. Welcome to the show, Charlie.
Thanks for having me.
No, it's great. And I was kind of talking through my synchronicity there because unbeknown to you before you contacted me, even unbeknown to me, there was a bit of a theme developing, and that was the octopus. Covered it with Geordie Rose, who makes the quantum computers. He had featured one of our shows in one of his presentations and then went on to speak about the H.P. Lovecraftian entities. And one of those is Cthulhu. Here's this octopus again. I had Nick Redfern on the other night talking about the Slender Man, and we got back into the octopus. And here you are emailing me out of the blue with your book, The Octopus of Global Control. You just couldn't make this stuff up, brother.
Yeah, a bit of a synchronistic. I'm not the first, though, to come out with the idea of the octopus, obviously. I took it from a quote from John Francis Hylan. He was the mayor of New York City back in 1922. And I'll read you this quote. And it's funny because the first time I read it, I just assumed it was about I didn't read the date. So I just assumed he was talking about what's going on in the world currently. So the quote says, "The real menace of our republic is the invisible government, which like a giant octopus sprawls its slimy legs over our cities, states, and nation. To depart from mere generalizations, let me say the head of the octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interests and a small group of powerful banking houses, generally referred to as the international bankers. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both parties, write political platforms, make cat's paws of party leaders, use the leading men of private organizations, and resort to every device to place in nomination for high public office only such candidates as will be amenable to the dictates of corrupt big business. These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control the majority of the newspapers and magazines in this country. They use the columns of these papers to club into submission or drive out of office public officials who refuse to do the bidding of the powerful corrupt cliques which compose the invisible government. It operates under cover of a self-created screen and seizes our executive officers, legislative bodies, schools, courts, newspapers, and every agency created for the public protection." Now, I read that and I thought, well, they're talking about today. But that's from 1922. And really, what's changed? Doesn't look like much.
No, absolutely not. And, that's a timeless quote, really. And if somebody did come out on YouTube or one of the alternative networks like this show here and say something like that, we would put music to it and we would hold this person up as being a champion of the truth movement. But this is what you've done. And I love that you've done it this way, Charlie, because this book that you've put together, you've done it in their own words. And this is what I try to do as much as I can, possibly. And I cover science a lot, so I'll quote the scientists themselves, try and show us the direction that they themselves say they're taking us. And that's why I like, you've got maybe over 700 quotes here from 500 different people. And I think that really helps to bring down the barriers when you're maybe talking to somebody who isn't aware of the big agenda. When you can show them that people of power and influence over the years have been saying just what we're saying, that really does make the penny drop.
For sure. And it's like verbal judo, and when you're competing in judo, it's taking someone's leverage and using it against them. Well, in this, it's sort of like verbal judo. I'm going to take their words and use it against them as well. Because a lot of times we never heard these things. We never heard these quotes. We never heard what David Rockefeller, his address to the Bilderberg Group in 1991 when he's thanking the media for keeping their big mouths shut. And the reason why you don't hear that, obviously, is because David Rockefeller's family controls the media. But but it goes beyond that. It's nice to hear it's nice to hear the words from some of these people that played important roles in it. I think it changes people's opinion. That they may think that I'm a lunatic or that you're crazy or their cousin is a tinfoil hat wearer, but when they can read the words from somebody that they respect already and understand, hey, wait a second, this guy's saying pretty much the same thing that my crazy cousin's saying about that. Maybe there's a little something to it. So maybe one quote here and there doesn't do the trick. So my feeling when I compiled this was I kept running across these quotes that were basically spelling out what the game is. And I realized that if I could put them together in a way, sort of compile all these quotes in a way that made a little bit of sense, I could show not my opinion about what's going on, but let them sort of out them as to what their opinion is or what their plan is. Because at some point they get arrogant and they start talking about what they want to do, whether it's the Georgia Guidestones or whether it's, George H.W. Bush going on talking about we see before us a new world order. And it just sort of like it becomes like noise in the background until you take a step back and you go, wait a second. This guy is calling for a new world. That new world order nonsense. Here's the president on TV calling for it. Like, maybe we should listen to this guy. Like, maybe we should take a step back and listen when David Rockefeller tells you what the plan is. But it's not just that. I also, let's face it, these topics can be pretty depressing. I mean, there's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of people being oppressed because of these policies and procedures that are in place. So in order to keep it sort of light, I had to add my warped sense of humor to it, just if for no other reason than to throw somebody a lifeline so that they could make it to the next chapter without jumping off the roof. So there's I found it, and I'm not trying to say that I'm Jon Stewart in any way, but I found watching Jon Stewart's show, The Daily Show, back when he was the host, as an interesting and pretty effective way of getting information. You could tell it was news, but it was wrapped up in a joke, and you could sort of differentiate between what the serious parts were and what the funny parts were, and allowed you to kind of laugh at the preposterousness of what's going on in our news on a day-to-day basis. So that was my intention, was to do that, bring a little bit of my OCD organizational skills and try and put this book together in a way that flowed, but also use other people's words, really important people, but not limited. We've got George Carlin and Bill Hicks in there quite a bit. And do it in a way that's sort of funny but gets the point across. So hopefully I was able to do that.
Oh, Charlie, we're going to get on very, very well, sir. I've been told I've got a warped sense of humor. I've had $1 for every time. But, it's important that we can kind of smile and joke about some of these dark topics, not only because of the effects that some of this can have on us emotionally and psychologically, but also at the same time, we're living with increasing censorship, and we're going to have to find new ways of getting this information across. And this may sound kind of way out there, but way back in the good old days when you had the kings and the court jesters and things like that, Charlie, I mean, that's how people really got to have a little laugh at the governments of that day. And maybe dressing it up in humour, maybe that's a really positive way to go, because not only are we changing the way people think when they really listen to what we're saying, but we're doing it so we can put a smile on their face in these dark times as well.
For sure. And so during the course of our conversation tonight, I will, if people are wondering why I'm quoting people, it's because that is sort of the format of the book. And in doing that and bringing someone from your side of the world into this, I will quote Christopher Hitchens, the author, when he said, "My own view is that this planet is used as a penal colony, lunatic asylum, and dumping ground by a superior civilization to get rid of the undesirable and unfit. I can't prove it, but you can't disprove it either." So here we are in this floating planet, a veritable dumping ground by somebody else. It sort of cracked me up because I always felt like he had a good look at things. He made a lot of people mad with his atheist sort of slant, but it was always funny.
No, I mean, that is so true. And I think David Icke was the first person I heard describing it all as a prison planet. Mm-hmm. Nothing could be truer. And I would add to that, it's like a laboratory as well, isn't it, really? Because
yeah, really.
all of the new technology, even the air that we breathe, all of it's been jacked. It really has. And all as a means to control us, coming from the same octopus that you're trying to uncover.
Yeah. And so and I credit David Icke with being very instrumental in getting me onto this path. I know a lot of people, when they talk about him, they bring up the reptilian thing, and I will say this: David Icke has earned the right to have people give him the benefit of the doubt on anything at this point, because I look back on his early work, and he was calling it, not because he's some spiritual guru who meditated on a mountain and found out all the answers. He just had the ability to sift through all the nonsense, and he has been proven right, in so many things. I think he gets a lot of credit for bringing people into this, and he deserves it. And I like him, and I put him in the book quite a bit. Does it sound crazy to say that the world's run by reptilians? Of course it sounds crazy, but a lot of the things sounding crazy doesn't preclude it from being a possibility. I mean, we have been shown over time that some of the things that we believe firmly are simply not true, and that's okay. It's okay as long as we make an attempt to figure it out and come from a place of like, look, I'm just trying to understand this world. And when I set about to write the book, one of the quotes that I have, and I don't know if this guy's been on your show, but I'm willing to bet that you've had Stephen Bassett from Paradigm Research Group on here, or you've talked about him before. And he made a comment that I wrote down, and it seemed to explain, to me at least, this search for knowledge in a way that kind of summed it all up. He said, imagine if the truth was a huge jigsaw puzzle, a big box with 20,000 pieces, and it is the truth, the absolute truth. It is a picture of the world as it really is. You come into this world, you get an education, you're handed this box, and the idea is to put all the pieces together. And if you put the pieces together on this huge table, it will be the truth about the world that you live in. So you set about to do that. All good, a wonderful thing, except there's a problem. Turns out the government that you are living under has made a decision to interfere with this truth process. It is a political decision being made for political reasons to serve the state, almost never the citizens. So the government has taken a whole bunch of these pieces out of your box and has thrown them away. They're missing. Well, that's a problem, but it gets worse. They've grabbed a bunch of pieces from another box, another puzzle, and thrown them into your box, to your puzzle. And now you have to put this thing together with an idea that what you're going to find is the truth. That is an almost impossible situation, and it is extremely effective to serve the state.
Wow.
Wow.
I'm on the show, but I would like to have him on. And that says it all, really. It really does. And, that's one of the hardest kind of barriers that I find we have to bring down in people, because we've been conditioned from birth, Charlie, to trust people in authority. If they're wearing a suit, you trust them. You got your teacher when you're young, all the way up to the politicians. And it's hard for some people to really admit, because I think subconsciously everyone knows, but to admit that these people that are meant to be there working for us, Jesus, we put them there. We're meant to vote for them and actually put them in there, but we have to admit that it's all kind of upside down world, bizarro land, because they work against us, right?
Yeah, I've found that the world makes a whole lot more sense when you remove the assumption that the people that are in positions of power are there to help you. When you vote for politicians and then you go, God, they're so screwed up. This guy's doing that. This guy's a maniac. This guy's sexually abusing somebody. This guy's saying inappropriate things. And you go, I can't believe this is all we can find, these horrible politicians, until you realize that, maybe the plan is that the people that are in positions of power are there because they're screw ups, because they're controllable, because they have the people that are really running the show that are above them, that have put them into power. They have done so. They've allowed them to rise to these positions, not because they're so great at their job, but because they're so terrible at it, because they're controllable, because they've, in the 50s, it was maybe that guy cheated on his wife and we have the pictures. And maybe in the 70s, it was, that politician's secretly gay. And now it's got to the point where it's like, this guy's a pedophile or whatever. They've got this dirt on these politicians, and then they will do whatever it is they are told to do from that point on. And it's usually not to look out for the best interest of the people. It's to do what the people above them are controlling them and telling them to do, which is usually not a good thing for us.
That's why I trust none of them. Absolutely none of them, Charlie, because the minute that they do gain any kind of traction, even if they're the most best-intentioned person on the planet. You know, if they start becoming a name, a face, then if they don't already have dirt on that person, then they'll certainly make sure they get some. If they don't get some, then you'll probably find they disappear in an accident, maybe something like that. But if they do get the dirt, well, that's when you see these people elevated to power. And over in the UK with the whole Jimmy Savile thing, without getting into the darker side of that, we really got a glimpse into how the political arm of this global octopus works. It's all about corruption. It's all about blackmail. And, you know, scum rises to the top. And these are psychopaths that we're dealing with. And I'm glad that you say that we have to turn it all around, because these people are not inept. Far from it. They're very, very psychopathically intelligent. And their plan is as well.
For sure. I mean, there's a mentality that flows to positions of power. There's a personality type that is, psychopathic for sure, sociopathic. Somebody that says, when I grow up, I want to tell other people what to do. That's kind of a weird mentality. It's a weird way of living. I think the majority of people are like, listen, don't bother me. I'm not going to bother you. I'll get involved, but I'm not looking to boss people around. But another aspect of the psychopathic personality is that they have no empathy, and there are barriers that you and I have that we come to and we just go, well, look, I just couldn't do that to another person. Well, they're sort of freed up in a sense where they don't have those restraints, and it allows them to cross lines that we would never cross, and therefore. Yeah, you want to be the prime minister? Well, you're not going to get there because you have the spotless resume. You're going to get there because you are crazy on some level. And I don't mean that in sort of a trite way, but like legitimately you are an insane person that wants to tell people what to do and have probably done a bunch of things that you shouldn't have done that people know about. And so you find these you find these guys like Jimmy Savile that rise up the ranks, and you go, wow, that's interesting that a guy who's a DJ has, 8 houses and Bentleys and all that stuff. And you start to, maybe it never crosses your mind that somebody could be that evil and that dark. And then after the fact, now we look back and it's so clear, it's so clear. And so in the United States, we're, over the last year or so, Pizzagate sort of caught hold, and there are a lot of people going, that's just crazy. That's fine. That's how that's how you normally learn about stuff like this. Is it starts off by you thinking that's insane, and then it starts to click, or you wind up having a connection to it where you go, wait a second, John Podesta. I remember him as the UFO guy, the guy that was pushing for UFO disclosure. I thought he might actually be a decent guy who wanted to disclose UFOs. Wait, he's into this, and so then you start to pick away at it, and then the more you pick, the more you're going to be there picking away at it. You're going to find more and more things, and that's a daunting task. That's a big responsibility, and so there's a point at which a lot of people just go, you know what, I got to go to work tomorrow. I don't care. Like, I can't do anything about this. I'm not getting involved. And I can understand that. I mean, I can understand people having that thought, because I did for a long, long time. And then it got to a point where I just said, I have to do something. I'm not going to passively accept this. And so to me, it started with telling my mother some story, some crazy new thing that I just discovered. And she's like, that's interesting. That's really fascinating. You've got all this information. What are you going to do with it? And I went, I don't know. I didn't know I had to do something with it. And that caused me to think about that.
We're coming up on a break, but this is so weird, because when I first started, kind of air quotes here, waking up, and I hate using that term, but we'll call it what it is. And, I used to tell my mum and my stepdad and the things I was coming across, my partner ran as well. And they would say exactly the same thing to me. Look, this is really, really interesting stuff, but where's it getting you? What are you going to do with this? And, of course, this was before I started the radio show. And yours would have been before you wrote your book. Definitely synchronicities at work here, Charlie, and so much more great info for us to get into. But before I let us go to the break, where can people check out your website, man, and where can they get a hold of the book?
You can get the book at Amazon, surprisingly. You can get it as a paperback and as a Kindle on Amazon. And I've been sending people just to my Facebook page, Facebook /the Octopus of Global Control. It's where I had a chance to put videos and more of a visual component to go along with the book. There's some funny stuff on there.
Check out Charlie Robinson, folks. We'll be back after the break. We're just getting going here. We're talking about the Octopus of Global Control. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Kev Baker. Thank you all for tuning in to tonight's Kev Baker Show. And the shows just keep on getting better and better. Tonight we're joined by Charlie Robinson, the author of The Octopus of Global Control. Now, this book here, I highly recommend it because this is the kind of thing that's loaded with kind of ammunition. And I don't mean that in a kind of way that's going to get me arrested over here in gun-controlled UK. I mean info bombs, literally. And, you know, Charlie, I don't know if you had one precise moment where the penny dropped for you. And I've been thinking about this lately. And many people say 9/11, right? And it's easy to say 9/11. That's when you really woke up and realized something was wrong with the world. And I thought about it a little bit more because I was at work on the day of 9/11, and even growing up, I used to be one of these kids, loved the paranormal, loved to question everything. But on that day of 9/11, the one thing that really kind of made me sit and screw my face up and think, nah, just no. It wasn't Building 7. It wasn't the free fall collapse. It was Flight 93. And when they showed us this picture of this little hole in a field, and we were led to believe that one of the planes had come down there. Now, I just smelt a rat, absolutely, when it came to that topic altogether. And obviously that pulled on a thread that led me to where I am today. But when it comes to these events, these little things that we can bring up at the kitchen table and stuff like that, this book is priceless, man. But what was the kind of one event for you or something that really made you think, come on, get out of here?
Well, with regard to Flight 93, before I get into my exact one, in the book, I think I have quotes from like 7 or 8 different people that all said just about the same thing. We got to the scene and there was no plane. There was a hole with a bunch of dirt in it and a bunch of metal, and that was it. There was no bodies. You've got the coroner saying, I was a coroner for about 1 minute because as soon as I got there, there were no bodies. You know, you've got an ex-CIA and an ex-FBI official saying, we got there. There were no bodies. There was no plane. This was not a plane crash. So that didn't actually, surprisingly, didn't wake me up like it did you. It took a couple years for me, really. It seemed a little unusual, of course, but in retrospect, one of the things that's very suspicious to me was Building 7, but the lack of information about Building 7 as well. You talk about people that architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth did a 15-year 9/11 campaign on the 15th anniversary. They had buses and mobile billboards all around New York with a very simple ad slogan that said, "Did you know a third building fell on 9/11?" And then they went around interviewing people, and so many people are like, "What are you talking about? I have never heard of this." So looking back on that and understanding that the media, first of all, was in complete coordination almost immediately about Arab hijackers. And that was due to Paul Bremer getting on the one guy that decided not to go to work at Marsh & McLennan that day, the one guy that lived, instead decided he would go straight to the studios at NBC and start talking about Osama bin Laden. That's, of course, nuts. But even all that didn't wake me up. It was in 2007. I was living in Las Vegas, selling new homes, working for a big home builder, and I was watching rampant fraud. And we were being asked to participate in it, and it was, part of the reason why the housing collapse happened, and also the Wall Street collapse, was because they were taking these horrible loans, packaging them up, and selling them on Wall Street, and then acting surprised when they imploded. So I'm living that. And then I read John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where he goes into detail about how the IMF and the World Bank had set up these schemes to indebt, basically put third world countries in slavery for them through the use of funding hydroelectric power plants and large projects like that were never going to pencil out. They were never going to make sense for the host country. They were always going to be a disaster.
I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because I've heard Perkins before, but I mean, he was literally the guy going in and doing this, wasn't he? He was bringing down government so that more kind of New World Order friendly regimes could be installed. Yeah,
he was, and he was. I think it seems like he spent the latter part of his life trying to like repay that and do things like try and help the indigenous people. But yeah, his job was to go in there and to convince these governments to take these loans from the World Bank in order to build some like in the case of Ecuador, a hydroelectric power plant. And if these guys didn't do it, then the CIA would send in what they called the jackals, which would throw a briefcase bomb in the guy's plane and they would blow up. And that's, of course, what happened to a couple of the guys. So it was a dirty business, obviously. And so I'm reading that and I'm understanding how on a global scale, the banks are used to control countries. And then I'm living the mortgage meltdown in the epicenter of it in Las Vegas, Nevada. And it's occurring to me that the same game is being run on us in the United States that had been run on people before. It's like pump and dump schemes, trying to get people into debt and then taking their, then default, forcing them to default and then stripping them of their assets. In the case of Ecuador, it might be that they privatize the lumber industry and sell it off. In the case of Las Vegas, it's that you lose your house to the bank and then Goldman Sachs buys them all up at 10 cents on the dollar. So I'm seeing all this, and then I'm going back. Just through I don't even really know how it started, but going back and then reliving 9/11 and looking at that again, going, wait a second, that looks unusual that there's a 47-story steel building that's kinking in the middle and then dropping at free fall speed, and you bring that up to people and they'll say, well, what are you, a structural engineer? No, I'm not a structural engineer. Do I have to be to recognize the controlled demolition when I see one? Of course not. I mean, this is, so then you go, well, then it did the NIST report. The NIST report came out and it said that it was, it happened due to a failure in one call. And you're just watching that going, no, no, it didn't. No, that's not right. Once again, not a structural engineer. Don't really need to be one to understand that there's something wrong with that. So this is that rabbit hole they always talk about, and I feel myself sort of sliding down there. And at some point, I stopped trying to claw my way out and just went with it and to see what was going on. I felt like I sort of owed it to myself to try and understand it as best as I could. And then you wind up in the Stephen Bassett paradigm where you're trying to put pieces together that you think should fit and they don't fit. And you're going, well, what's wrong with this? And you realize that there's a huge disinformation campaign on a bunch of different levels. And then it becomes kind of depressing, to be honest with you. You get to a point where you go, well, I'm just one person. How am I going to fix this? And maybe what you can do is to wake up the people that are close to you. So I have ruined a Thanksgiving dinner or two by bringing up 9/11. I know a lot of your listeners probably have too. I know there's a lot of family members that go, listen, just shut up. I don't want to hear you anymore. I don't want you talking about this. You're bringing me down. So when I wrote the book, part of the intention was for people like sort of us to buy the book, to give it to somebody that doesn't understand all this yet. Because I cover so many different topics in there, you never know what's going to be the one topic that's going to click with someone. And like for me, it was Building 7. For someone else, it might be the Gulf of Tonkin. For somebody else, it might be, the Boston bombing or whatever. There's going to be an event where people are going to go, hey, wait a second, that sounds a little funny to me. And so I can be the bad guy. Buy the book, send it to them, let them read it or don't read it. I filled it with his bullet points and quotes and made it as easy to read. It's a big book, but I made it as easy to read and covered as many different topics as I could to try and get somebody to find one piece that resonates with them and makes the difference. Because as we all know, it all started with one thing for us, and from there we just sort of got carried away.
And I learned a long time ago. 9/11, one of the best and most effective kind of topics to start a conversation with maybe somebody who doesn't look at the information we look at. But instead of trying to tell people how 9/11 went down, I gave up on that years ago, because that in itself, that's a minefield. so much misinformation, disinformation out there. And in my opinion, so many different competing theories that, all look very good on paper, but they're all out there almost to cause infighting in the movement itself. So what I try to do, Charlie, is I just try to point out that there's absolutely no way on earth that it could have happened the way that they told us it happened. Because, we can go into the dustification, all the different theories, stuff like that, but we can never prove which way or another it was done. But let's just all agree that it was definitely not the way we were told.
That's exactly my philosophy on that. I have said that is their story. So it's their job to prove that that's the way it really happened. I don't have to prove that it's nanothermite, directed energy, suitcase nukes. I don't know. All those things sound crazy. They all sound possible. I'll tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't 19 Arab hijackers with box cutters getting in 4 airplanes, flying them all over the place without being bothered, and then miraculously piloting them directly into buildings, or in the case of the Pentagon, 3 feet off the ground and right into the comptroller's office. I mean, one thing is for sure, the conspiracy theory is the official story. Let's be honest. That story is garbage. So it's not my job. It's not my duty. It's not my responsibility to prove how it happened. It's their responsibility. All I have to prove is that it didn't happen the way they said it. And it didn't happen the way they said it. And they're saddled with the responsibility of proving that story, that horrible story, not the other way around. So don't fall into that trap of having to, if someone says, well, you believe 9/11 didn't happen, then tell me how it happened. I don't know. There are a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of competing factions as to how it happened. And that is a can of worms for sure. It didn't happen the way they said it happened. That is a fact, and that's their story. So don't let somebody try and flip it on you and make you have to prove it. That's not the way it works. It's their story. They prove it. When it's my story, I'll prove it my way. So.
And, false flags, it seems like not a week goes by when there's not somebody shouting that a false flag is happening here, there, everywhere, nowhere, all at the same time. But I believe, like me, you listen to Ola Damagard, and he's got a really good take on how all of this goes down. And he's taught me a lot, as in with what to look out for when these massive major events start playing out, be it the Boston bombing, the Paris attacks, the London attacks. Take your pick nowadays. But would you agree with Ola that it's almost as if, call them a traveling circus or something, maybe 100 people or so that go around and take part in these false flags, the ones that really are undeniably false flag operations, Charlie?
I think he is right on. I have a tremendous amount of respect for his work. He comes from a place of love and compassion, and I like that a whole lot. He is not trying to sell somebody on it. He's pointing out what he's found, and he's found quite a bit. And he's a dot connector for sure. He, it's it may very well be a traveling road show. There's an agenda for sure. There is now like I said, I lived in Las Vegas for a long, long time. And so on the morning of the shooting in Las Vegas, I woke up, my wife said, uh-oh, something bad's happened in Las Vegas. I turned on the TV about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I said, after about 3 minutes of listening, I said, you hear that? That's a red flag to me. It's when the media, I forget, MSNBC or CNN or somebody said lone gunman. And my feeling was, what's the rush? What's the rush to call it a lone gun? Why don't you guys take your time and investigate this? Why don't you figure this out? And then you turn the other channel, lone gunman in the, some whatever floor, 32nd floor, shooting at people, lone gunman. And when the media is all giving you the same story, coordinated story, that's a red flag. Because they shouldn't be agreeing on anything. They should have reporters talking to different people, coming up with different stories. But that didn't happen. You heard lone gunman right away, and then that was pushed. And anybody that came up with a different story, or anybody that challenged that story at all, Laura Loomer, was branded as being a lunatic or a conspiracy theorist or whatever. Hey, whatever happened to like asking questions in the press conference to the police? She got thrown out of that press conference for saying, I've got a valet ticket that we found that put the shooter in there 3 days earlier ahead of your time frame. What did the guy do? The guy said, get out.
She dared to do the job of an actual journalist.
Right. The head, the LA County or the Las Vegas County Sheriff should have said, "You have that information? We would love to have it. Please meet me after. Let's talk after the press." That wasn't the response. She got get out. And so you have to wonder, what is the resistance to additional information? What is the resistance when you hear people, when there's like people saying, "Hey, I was in the Bellagio and they were shooting in there." And they say, "Well, are you sure?" And the lady's going, "Yeah, I know the difference between being in the Bellagio when there's not shooting and being in there when there's shooting. Yeah, I know the difference." So these stories come up that question or contradict the official narrative. And instead of people saying, "Well, that's interesting. Let's go down that path and see what's down there. Let's get more information. There may be nothing, but let's at least explore it." Instead, the mainstream media is ignoring it. And that's a huge red flag. That's when you understand and you know that they are controlled and bought, because they're simply not doing their job, because their job is supposed to be get to the bottom of what went on. And the fact that they have a story that they're sticking to it, no matter how ridiculous it gets, they're still sticking to it, should show you they deserve no respect. They have no credibility. They're doomed, and they have nobody to blame but themselves.
And that's become so apparent with the whole nerve agent attack in the UK over here, that ended up with a photo fit being released that had us all laughing and joking on here that whoever it was they were chasing, this Russian agent named Gordon, he looked like he must have committed crimes against Minecraft, because they'd pixelated his face out and then they'd even redacted his eyeballs on top of that. So we had great fun on Photoshop. And that is a really kind of key thing to watch out for. That should be a red flag. It really should. No matter how ridiculous things get, they just double down on the lies. And people might ask Charlie, or they might say that this is ridiculous, getting 100 people, 200 people, however many people it is, this traveling circus of false flaggery. How do you get people to do that? Well, it's much like the politics and much like every other aspect of life that they control. They could get dirt on these people. They could blackmail them. And it's a horrible thing to say, but there are some human beings out there that are just nasty. We've got the psychopaths, we've got sociopaths, and we only have to take a look at some of the comments we get on YouTube to understand that not everyone out there thinks like us. So perhaps that's how they're able to get the traveling circus of false flaggery.
You might get some people that are on board with that agenda, for sure, that volunteer. You might get some other guy, you say, "Hey, listen, you're looking at 10 years in federal prison for drug trafficking unless you want to play ball. We have an option for you." "Oh, okay. You want me to what? Pretend like I got blown up in a bomb and now I don't have to go to prison for 10 years? Yeah, I'll do that." So there's a lot of people, there's a lot of ways you can get people that are just ideologically opposed to guns, and they say, "Look, the ends justify the means. If I have to fake that there were school shootings in order to get guns out of this world, I'll do that." And so there are a variety of reasons for people to, participate in this sort of stuff. And another one could be that they pay extremely well. People need
the whole school shooting thing, people think that's kind of confined to the US. And I love to remind people about the Dunblane massacre over here in Scotland. And that led to the outright gun ban that we've got. And I know that you yourself, you personally are not a fan of guns, but you look at the bigger picture, don't you, Charlie? And you see that there's an agenda attached to all of this kind of gun grabbing, isn't there?
Well, there's a quote from Mao Zedong who says, "You register and ban the firearms before the slaughter." So he understood. There's a common denominator between Mao in China and Stalin in Russia and Adolf Hitler and Pol Pot in Cambodia. They disarm the populace first. And I'm not a gun fan. I don't like guns. I've had been a victim of attempted carjacking when I was a kid. Watched a guy put a gun to my mom's head and say he was going to blow her brains out. So, and I've had friends of mine that have had family. I'm not a gun fan, but at the same time, I understand what the plan seems to be, and it is to disarm the populace. And though I'm not a fan of guns, I'm also not a fan of getting dragged out of my house and into a ditch and shot in the head, like happened so many times in Europe over the last 100 years. And people will roll their eyes when you hear that, and they'll go, "Well, listen, this is America. That stuff doesn't happen. That's old timey stuff, Well, maybe. but everybody in Europe was in denial until it came to their door, until somebody knocked on the door and dragged you out, and you were shot because you believed in a different religion, or you were a gypsy, or you were a whatever. So this stuff to sort of say, well, it can't happen here. That everyone else thought it can't happen here too, as it was happening to them. As the last thing is going through their head, they're thinking, I can't believe I can't believe I'm about to get shot. I can't believe I'm about to die right now. And this happened 73 million times in China and 40 million times in Russia. I mean, and this is what happens when psychopaths get in power. They thin the herd out, and they start with people that might pose a problem to them, whether it's a real problem or a perceived problem. It almost doesn't matter. In their eyes, it's whatever they think might become an issue for them. So disarming us is an incremental process. It's the David Icke totalitarian tiptoe. They don't take away your rights all at once. They take the assault weapons first, then they take the bump stocks, whatever that is, and then they take the shotguns, then they take the pistol, then they take the knives, then they take the hand grenades, or whatever you've got. It's all going to go, and they're going to make you beg for it. That's the trick. So it's not just we're going to take away these rights. We have to frame it in a way that you beg us to take away your rights. And so when things like that, when you have school shootings, obviously people don't like to see kids shot. And if there aren't school shootings, then they'll manufacture them, because those are even better, because then kids actually really don't have to get shot. And so I get into that in the Sandy Hook book, or chapter.
And Sandy Hook, that's one of the topics that's brought me the most kind of heat over on YouTube. I had Professor Jim Fetzer on the show, and we were talking about his book, Nobody Died at Sandy Hook. And it was maybe a year or so later, I woke up one morning, went over to YouTube, and I had to go through some really asinine kind of learning about copyright, stuff like that, and how not to offend people because it had been deemed offensive. So I had to go to kind of the politically correct naughty step, sit there for 5 minutes and then come back. But, this whole Sandy Hook, I mean, I really do have a lot of questions surrounding that. And it sounds really controversial to say that perhaps nobody did die there. But, I could make a really compelling case for that being what actually happened, Charlie. What's your take on Sandy Hook?
I had a conversation with Jim Fetzer about 2 weeks ago. Same thing. Listen, it's a topic that's polarizing. I say, for those that don't believe it happened, investigate it. Seriously, take a look at it. I did as much as I could in the book to put bullet points in there. Jim Fetzer makes some really good points. Now, you have to understand his motivation. His motivation is he's not out to insult people. He's not out to agitate alleged family members and things like that. He is coming from the standpoint of it didn't happen. It's an integrated capstone event, a joint venture between the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA. That's what it is. It's L-366. There is a booklet on it. It was a drill. It was a drill. Nobody died.
Charlie, there's another kind of aspect to this, just thinking about it as we speak, the whole denial thing, because let's look at recently. We had this whole Syrian chemical attack debacle, and it didn't take long for us all to kind of analyse that and realise that probably nobody got gassed at all. We had Robert Fisk over there.
Yeah, good job by him.
Yeah, well-respected journalist. He said exactly the same thing. And it's quite shocking almost how it's easy for us to see how we would use kids over in a foreign country like Syria and pretend they've been the victims of some horrible gas attack. Yet some people aren't willing to kind of accept that they would do the similar at home, maybe not a gas attack, but stage it as some gun attack. This is the same people that are organising the stuff in Syria that would be organising the stuff at home.
And they have such little respect for us that they ran the same play in Syria 3 times in a row to try and get it to stick. That Assad had decided to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory by gassing his own people when he was winning the war. I mean, it's just such a strategic blunder. He would have to be the dumbest guy ever. And to do it 3 times now, I mean, that's why I cover so many topics in the book, because it might be that that people are hung up on, like, listen, Sandy Hook, I can't wrap my head around that. But I understand that those Syria chemical attacks are total nonsense, and it might be because Robert Fisk, his story came out and he talked about how it's like they just, kids came in because they were having a hard time breathing because they're living in tunnels because there's bombing going on, and so they started, some guy starts yelling gas attack, and then throwing water in their face and filming it. And he's going, yeah, that really happened. But there wasn't a gas attack. Some guys just yelling that. You realize, well, why would they fake that? Well, of course, it makes perfect sense why they would fake that. Trump came out and said, we're getting out of Syria. A couple days later, that happened. Now, guess what? We're not getting out of Syria. So it's so obvious now. They're running these plays like with the junior varsity team. They don't even bother to bring in the pros anymore. They just keep trying. And frankly, it's embarrassing that they keep trying the same thing. They, have a little bit of decency and at least mix up the story for us a little bit. Instead of saying it was chemical attacks 3 times in a row, say it was, I don't know. Give us something different. But these fake chemical attacks, they're not working. The people they're not listening to the media anymore. And in fact, it's now causing them to go back and say, well, you said that was a chemical attack before. Let's look at that. So it's having the exact opposite effect that they wish. It's exposing them for being the manipulators of the media that they are.
That's why I honestly think this Octopus of Global Control, as you so aptly name it, is in panic mode right now, because so many people are waking up, and the thing that they fear most is us thinking for ourselves. We'll be back after the break, and Charlie will give us a whole lot more to think about, discussing his book, The Octopus of Global Control. Don't go anywhere. 1 hour down, 1 hour to go. Loving this so far. I hope you are too. We'll be right back.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back. Hour number 2 with tonight's very special guest. Loving this guy's mind already. Definitely 2 peas in a pod, both with a warped sense of humour as well. We've got Charlie Robinson here live with us tonight, and we're going over his book, The Octopus of Global Control. Now in the chat room, if you want to find the chat room, you head on over to tfrlive.com/chat. We've got somebody in there called Awakening Now. And they say, Kev, you are one of the main reasons I've begun this journey of self-thought. And knowing most that is said is BS. I got that wrong there. That's my reading, not their writing. And it says, being able to see the truth is eye-opening and apparently comes with a cost. I want to thank Awakening Now for those kind words. But, it is very eye-opening. And sometimes it does come at a cost. And we were talking earlier about talking to family members. And I find that can be, the hardest conversations to have. You can meet complete strangers at conferences or just out in the workplace. It's so easy to talk about the things we talk about, but try to talk to family members. It really can come at a loss. And, sometimes it can get us down, but that's where it's important to laugh as well. And being a host in this kind of genre, this field, it's easy for people to call me, and I can see why they would call me some proponent and propagator of fear porn, because we do tend to kind of concentrate on the more nasty, the negative, the darker topics in life, the things that affect us all in a negative way. But, this fear porn tag, Charlie, this is where I want us to pick up the conversation now, because like I said to you, I would rather know if a train's coming down the track and it's about to hit me, as opposed to somebody knowing it's coming and just thinking, I'm not going to tell them. I'll just keep it secret, right?
Yeah, for sure. There is a level. There's a line that you can cross in which you just become, the boy who cried wolf. But I'm with you. I'd much rather have the understanding of what is happening or what can happen. That way I can prepare for it, or I can see it coming a mile away and I'm not as traumatized. Part of what happens to us is they intentionally try to traumatize us. If you look at 9/11 on television, that was just trauma after trauma. I mean, we were we all had post-traumatic stress after watching that for, a week straight on the news every night. And so part of that is is, yes, I understand that you could be called a fear peddler, fear porn, whatever. There is definitely something to that. But the media is the biggest pushers of fear of anybody, because that's what they sell. They even have a term for it. If it bleeds, it leads, meaning it's the lead story. If it's an accident about somebody getting, hurt in a car, shot up or whatever. I found that there's a balance that you can strike where you're informing people without alarming them. I think it's helpful to have these conversations, and then also probably helpful to know when to not scare people as well. One of the things that I put in the book, a whole chapter, was on psychedelics, which is used as, the demonization of psychedelics used to make sure people don't get onto those topics and find out things. Now, if you want to talk about funny quotes, there's probably nobody better than Terence McKenna. If you don't know who he is, he's what you would think of when you think of like a dirty hippie scientist guy. He looked like he's rolled out of a Volkswagen bus at a Grateful Dead concert. And I put a lot of quotes in there because he was a doctor, and he had an understanding of sort of the medicine behind things, but he also was a guinea pig on himself to try out psychedelic drugs and see if he could figure out why they were so demonized. And it's a funny thing. He talks about a substance called DMT, which is a interesting thing. And he's got this quote that I had to put in the book. It says, "What happens on DMT is a troop of elves smashes down your front door and rotates and balances the wheels on the after-death vehicle, present you with the bill, then depart. It's completely paradigm-shattering. Union with the white light you could handle. An invasion of your apartment by jeweled, self-dribbling basketballs from hyperspace that are speaking in Demotic Greek is not something you anticipated and could handle. Sometimes people say, is DMT dangerous? It sounds so crazy. The answer is only if you fear death by astonishment." So that is in my chapter, Death by Astonishment, that gets into some of these substances that have been used over the years to try and peel back the lies to see the truth. One of them, DMT, obviously mushrooms. You've got ayahuasca, which is made with DMT, a sort of drinkable brew. So I put all those in there because I think it's important for people to understand that there are ways to sort of pierce the veil and see what's behind there. And if anyone's ever done mushrooms before, you will understand there is another world out there. There is more to this planet than we are being told. And
growing up on the banks of Loch Ness, I will say it. Very active mushroom activity up there, and it certainly pulls back the curtains on what reality may or may not be. And, I like how you say that it kind of lifts the veil, it pierces the veil. That's exactly what it does. And, just like when you go on this journey and you seek the answers, Charlie, you usually end up with more questions. And that's much like DMT, ayahuasca, things like that, because you go in there and you go in with an intent, you go in to find out how things work, but because everything is so much different than anything you could ever have thought, probably left again with more questions than answers.
For sure. And I love Graham Hancock, and he sums it up pretty nicely. He says, "I think it's obvious that the psychedelics are demonized and illegalized by our society because somewhere in our society are controlling minds that realize that these substances have the potential, have the power to unpick the controlling hierarchy." I think he's right. Part of that controlling hierarchy has to do, is through the media, which we are told we're told that the way the world is, according to them, of course. And it's important, shows like this do a really good job of exposing us to different concepts and ideas. You don't have to believe all of them. You don't have to, they won't all resonate with you, but there might be something that jumps out and you go, wait a second, I didn't know that about, frequencies, the music frequencies being recorded in 440 hertz instead of 432. And you go, well, that sounds like weird. And then you dig into it a little bit and you go, oh man, that's crazy that they're controlling the frequencies that we're hearing. Well, maybe that's being used to control us. And so that's, like you said, you wind up with more questions than you have when you started. But that's okay. And I think it's important to not put a ton of pressure on ourselves to have it all figured out. We're not going to have it figured out. There's a lot going on that we'll never figure out. But I think we owe it to ourselves to at least try a little bit.
Absolutely. And, this octopus, right? I mean, it's a brilliant way of describing everything, this control system, the cabal, everything. And it's got 8 tentacles, as you say in the book. And they include military control, government control, covert control, physical control, financial control, media, spiritual, and scientific. Now, when you were writing the book and putting all of this together, Charlie, I mean, what was the one that actually shocked you and surprised you the most when you started to really dig into it?
Probably the medical. I would say the medical control bothered me the most because it's sold to us as a benefit, and it's not. In the United States, if you watch the nightly news, you will understand pretty easily why you never see legitimate stories about medical problems, vaccines, cancers, real things like that. And that is because every other commercial is from the pharmaceutical industry. It's some new drug for some new disease that didn't exist, 5 years ago. You've got social anxiety, but the side effects of this may cause spastic colon or uncontrolled vomiting or head twitches that remain permanent. And you're like, great, I'm not socially anxious anymore but I crap my pants at a cocktail party because of the side effect. I mean, it's so preposterous. We watch all these drugs being pushed, and then you go, well, you just think in the United States, you just assume that's everywhere. Well, really, there are only 2 countries in the world that allow you to advertise pharmaceuticals on television. That's New Zealand and the United States. And if you decide, if you're a journalist, if you're doing a story on vaccines and you're on the nightly news, NBC or something, and you say that there's thimerosal still in these vaccines, and thimerosal is made out of mercury, and mercury is a poisonous substance second only to plutonium. You talk about how that's a bad idea that's in these vaccines. You are going to have the president of Merck in the president of NBC's office the next morning screaming at him, threatening to pull all their advertising because one of their news reporters drew a conscience and decided he was going to report on this stuff. That's why it doesn't happen. We're controlled by the advertisers, and the pharmaceutical industry is the biggest advertiser in mainstream media. And so you're not going to get these stories about what's really happening with vaccines. You get a movie that comes out like Vaxxed, and you watch the pushback. You watch the pushback in Australia, and they're taking all the producers' passports. I mean, that alone ought to be a red flag. That ought to get your attention. Say, wait a second, why are you so concerned about this documentary that's wrong, right? This documentary made by conspiracy theorists. Why are you so concerned about that? If it's so obviously full of nonsense, what's the problem? Well, the problem is it's not obviously full of nonsense. It's filled with a bunch of facts. And I reduced the pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine argument to just a series of yes and no questions, and we can read these off. Is mercury one of the most dangerous substances known to humans? Is thimerosal composed of 49.6% mercury? Has thimerosal been used as a preservative in vaccines and flu shots? Is it still being used in some of them? Has the EPA set the toxicity level of mercury at 0.1 micrograms? The answer is yes. Are there 25 micrograms of mercury in each flu shot? The answer is yes. That's 250 times the allowed amount. I mean, the flu shots are recommended by the CDC for the general public. They're recommended for pregnant women. And mercury causes brain damage. These are all facts. And like when you bring these up to people, they roll their eyes. Some people roll their eyes and they say, doctors would never get on board with that. Well, I can understand that argument. And I would say that most doctors probably don't know any better. You have to understand that when they start medical school, they are heavily influenced by the pharmaceutical companies. They might go to that school, but they work for a pharmaceutical company as soon as they get out of there in some way or another. They are heavily influenced. And so they suppress this information, and doctors don't like to think that they've done a bad job. They certainly don't want to look back on their career and go, oh my God, what have I done? So they'll sell themselves that they haven't done anything wrong. And you can, you see a lot of pediatricians in the United States, if they say, we're going to do the full vaccine schedule, and you say no, they'll throw you out of their office. I've watched it happen. I had a pediatrician say, "What do you don't believe the government?" to me, and I just started laughing out loud, well, no, of course I don't believe the government. And he said, "Well, now I know what I'm working with." And I went, "Whoa, okay." Well, now I know it.
Yeah, I hope you ran out the door at that point.
I did. We were saying, we're out of here. I mean, because look, and we had a pediatrician that said, "Listen, I understand the concerns of people, and we can do a schedule that you feel more comfortable with." And he put it in a good way. An interesting way. He said, "I think that with regard to talking about autism and vaccines causing autism potentially," he said, "I think that with autism, maybe it takes 7 things. Maybe you got to have 7 boxes ticked for it to click and become autism. And maybe vaccines is one of those, but maybe it's something else. Maybe it's glyphosate. Maybe it's GMOs. Maybe it's air pollution. Maybe it's, and he said, I think that it could be considered. It could be in the discussion for that, but I don't know for sure that it causes it, but I respect your right to examine this further." And I was like, wow, where have you been? This is just a revolutionary way of looking at it. And then I started thinking, well, you know what? It shouldn't be a revolutionary way of looking at it. Here we are as parents deciding that we're going to play an active role in trying to understand what's going on. And you will be laughed out of a lot of pediatricians' office for doing that and considered like you're a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, for wanting to make sure that my kid is safe. Yeah, call me. Yeah, I'm a conspiracy theorist. Then that's fine. Call me whatever you want. But I'm going to examine these things because it's my responsibility to do that. And I think a lot of times we don't take responsibility for these things. We have a role to play in this, and you do a very good job, of course, in your show of waking people up to a variety of factors. But as human beings living on this planet, we have to take some responsibility for our actions too, and we have to not be afraid to stand up to someone and say, "I'm not doing that. That's not okay. I'm not going to do that to another human being. I'm not going to do that I'm not going to inject poisons into my kid when you can't prove to me that they're safe. I'm not going to feed my family GMOs. I'm not going to do it." And that's not only is our right to do it, it's our responsibility to do it. So that's one thing I think that we sort of have to put a foot in our friends and neighbors' behinds to get them going on that, to remember we play an active role in this, and we have a responsibility to investigate some of these things. And I'm not talking necessarily false flags. I mean, you can do that if you'd like, but I'm talking about things that impact us directly: medicine, food, what we're breathing, things like that. We have to step up and be more participatory in this process of figuring out what's the truth and what are lies.
Absolutely, because the information is out there, and at this time, while we still have the internet, more fool us if we aren't aware of the things that are going on, and double fool us if we don't take action on the back of that. And you were talking about the vaccinations there, and a really famous story from over here in the UK at the time, a few years ago now, was Dr. Andrew Wakefield.
Yes.
Now, he was chased out of the UK because he was talking about the MMR vaccine, stuff like that. And thankfully, he set up a new place over in the US, in Austin, Texas, I believe. But he's been back in the news just recently, and they've been blaming him for outbreaks of various diseases all around America because of his stance on anti-vaccination. And, they'll keep on hammering home and trying to condition and program parents into believing that these vaccinations are the best things for the children. But again, when you start looking into this, it couldn't be further from the truth. But there's something else I want to get into in this segment while we're talking about this, Charlie. And that is about other doctors that speak out about other things within the medical and the health profession. And you have looked into something, or you've noticed a trend, and it's a disturbing, deadly trend, and it involves, let's call them alternative doctors. And these are people that are mysteriously turning up dead in really, really dodgy circumstances. And when you look into what they were working on, well, they weren't exactly working for Big Pharma. In fact, you could say that they were kind of exposing the secrets that have been kept from us all, right?
They were, yeah. There's a substance called GC-MAF, and I will preface this by saying I'm not a doctor.
Same here. Yes, we're just speculating and repeating what we've heard.
Yeah, but there are guys that are doing investigations into GC-MAF to watch how it affects the body with cancer in particular, and they're seeing some amazing results, starting to treat their patients for this. And this was happening in the UK, and I know that they've been going after them quite seriously. It's been happening. Holistic doctors in the United States. There's a long list, and I'm not talking like 3 or 4 people. I'm talking like 75 people or so that are on this list of holistic doctors that have turned up dead under mysterious circumstances. Circumstances such as, shooting yourself in the chest and then throwing yourself in a river and that being called a suicide. Really after the FBI raided your office 3 days earlier. So, really weird situations where it appears that people are getting a little too close to the truth, perhaps, and are being sort of wiped out if they get close enough. We had something in the United States. We had something not too long ago that was it happened at Disneyland. There was an outbreak of measles at Disneyland. Now, in Southern California, and I was living in Southern California, so I was watching this carefully because I was interested in their story about it. And it was so funny because I just took a look at what they were saying and picked apart their math pretty easily. So the mainstream media was talking. I'm pulling it up right now. Talking about that these kids all started getting measles at Disneyland. Now, if you've ever been to Disneyland, you understand that place is inherently a petri dish of diseases from people from all over the world. I mean, it is the melting pot. You've got kids from every country, it seems, all at the same time mixing, right? So they came out, and the big uproar was that of the kids that got measles, 7% of the kids were unvaccinated, and they were just livid about this. And it made me think, well, you can either be vaccinated or unvaccinated. So if 7% of the kids were unvaccinated that got the disease, then that means 93% of the kids were vaccinated that got the disease. They didn't mention that. They didn't mention that you were 13 times more likely to catch measles at Disneyland if you had the MMR shot. They didn't mention that. They just said that 7% of those kids were not vaccinated. So to me, I looked at that and I was like, this is insanity. This is people that are taking information and spinning it in a way to demonize a certain group and not allowing any sort of debate. I can't believe more people don't get the measles at Disneyland. I can't believe people don't get everything at Disneyland. It's a disgusting place, filled with a bunch of kids licking stair rails and picking their nose and stuff. So there's just inherent disease just from being there. So, but this is what happens when the media gets involved with a topic like this. They skew the numbers, they demonize people, they paint the picture in a way that presents whatever narrative they're trying to sell. And in this case, the particular narrative was people are sick at Disneyland because they weren't vaccinated, and how dare you put the rest of the population at risk. Never mentioning that 93% of the people, of the kids that had it, were actually vaccinated themselves and still got measles, the disease that they were supposedly prevented from getting because of this magic shot that they got. So
there's a perfect example of how statistics, they can be brilliant, but literally, they can mean anything, because 100% of people that suffer from cancer drink water. And that's factually correct, but does it literally mean anything? No, it doesn't. And that just shows you how you can weaponize these statistics to fit whatever narrative you want. Roll out a couple of doctors to tell you this on the flashy news, and people buy it hook, line, and sinker, Charlie.
Well, there's what they've done now in the States is they have held community parties on the weekends, vaccination parties. And what they do is they say to families, come on out. We're holding a raffle this weekend for kids that need to be vaccinated. They can get their shots, and then they can also enter to win a prize. And if their kid gets the raffle, if the raffle ticket gets picked, they can win a Kindle ebook reader by Amazon. And I thought, wow, what irony if they use that Kindle to buy my book and read it on there about vaccines. But you know who else gives out Kindle and iPads for coming to events that they don't want to? People selling timeshares. And you know why? Because timeshares suck. And so when you have to give away prizes in order to get kids to come out to get their vaccinations, maybe the problem is the vaccination. Maybe the problem is that what you're trying to convince people to do is something that maybe they don't like, or they don't want, or they don't need. So it's weird to me that that there's this full court press to just sort of to inject kids. Now, out here, I don't know about Europe specifically, but the standard dose, the standard CDC vaccine schedule has kids getting 74 different doses of 16 different vaccines by the time they're 18.
We had a really big high-profile case over here in the UK recently, and it was a young child by the name of Alfie Evans, and he was 2 years old, and he lost his life. And in the days that followed, I seen one of the kind of reports, and again, I can't confirm if this is right or wrong. Certainly seemed to be right. But it was like the vaccination list. It was like the health kind of records for this kid. And up until the vaccinations kicked in, and again, it might be coincidence. I'm not a doctor, but it is certainly quite suspicious how things went downhill as the vaccines went in. And this is such a common story nowadays. It really, really is. Is it the vaccines that are causing all of the autism, the problems around the world? You know, Charlie, I think it's just like you were saying, just one aspect of everything that's going on right now from the minute we're born till the minute we die.
So we've got a great quote from a guy named Dr. Russell Blaylock. He's a retired neurosurgeon in the United States, and he's also an author. And he put it in a way that made a whole lot of sense. He said, "We're developing a society because of these different toxins are known to affect brain functions. We're seeing a society that not only has a lot more people of lower IQ, but a lot fewer people of higher IQ. In other words, a dumbing down, a chemical dumbing down of society so that everyone is sort of mediocre. That leaves them dependent on government because they can't excel. We have these people of lower IQ that are totally dependent on government, and then we have this mass of people who are going to believe anything they're told because they can't really think clearly, and very few people of high IQ who have good cognitive function who can figure this all out." And that's what they want. So, you can kind of piece it together as to why they are so insistent in spending so many hundreds of millions of dollars of propaganda money to dumb down society.
Well, what an awesome guest. We'll be right back to Wentworth.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
There we go. We are back. Final segment, unfortunately, of tonight's Kev Baker Show. And what a guest we have had with us tonight. We've had Charlie Robinson with us, the author of the Octopus of Global Control. I was telling Charlie today that I hadn't actually heard of him before he'd got in touch with me, but I thank the universe, God, Wookiee, Buddha, whoever it is out there, that Charlie did get in touch with me, because this has been really, really good stuff tonight. It's the kind of thing that, you can really turn on in the car, on your iPhone, let people listen to basic entry-level stuff that starts the conversation that will lead to another awakened mind. And before the break, we were touching upon the strange frequency at which holistic doctors were turning up dead in very questionable circumstances. Now, this was almost like an echo in the universe for me, because it reminded me of the dead bankers that were all kind of flying out of windows and stuff like that. Very questionable stuff with nail gun deaths and things. And then before that, years ago, I'd come across something called the microbiologist conspiracy, where all these microbiologists were turning up dead as well. And I noticed in the chat, Charlie, that people were really kind of happy that you'd looked into something called GC Math. That's Golf Charlie Mike Alpha Foxtrot. Yes, that's the army coming out in me there. But talk to us about this, man, because this is kind of new to me.
Yeah. So there was a doctor named Jeffrey Bradstreet, and he was an alternative autism specialist. He was heavily involved in the research of GC-MAF. And what that is, it's globulin component macrophage activating factor. What this does is there's a substance called nagalase. It's a protein made by all cancer cells and viruses. It causes immunodeficiency. It was being found in kids with autism in high concentrations, and nagalase blocks the production of the GC-MAF protein. So it inhibits the immune system from doing its job. It's sort of like without this immune system, cancer and viral infections grow unchecked. So nagalase blocks the production of GC-MAF. And so when they're finding all this nagalase and they're thinking, well, this is interesting, it prevents the body from utilizing vitamin D, and so it's like nagalase is it disables the immune system, like a burglar breaks into a building, shuts off the alarm system, then opens the doors and all its buddies can come in. And so these doctors, among them Dr. Jeff Bradstreet, were finding that they could treat these kids with autism with GC-MAF, and it was eliminating nagalase, and it was reversing these effects of autism. And so that clearly that's going to get you on the radar of people. So the FDA raided his Georgia office, and then they had a very specific agenda. They were looking for anything they could find pertaining to GC-MAF. That's what the search warrant stated. And then he wound up dead in a river after shooting himself, in the chest. And it's just one of those nail gun situations, But there were other doctors that were involved. Dr. Nick Gonzalez was working on this in Florida, and he was having tremendous success. He even is on the record as saying, quote, "I've been told drug companies know about my work, but hope I get hit by a bus." Well, he's dead now. And he died a couple days after making that statement. So from a heart attack, of course, not a bus, but so you've got this list of doctor after doctor after doctor: Bruce Hensel, Teresa Sievers, Jeffrey Whiteside, Patrick Fitzpatrick. I mean, there's just a list of all these doctors that were on to this topic, working with this particular substance, and then they turn up dead. Now, that could be a coincidence, I suppose, but if you've done any sort of research into this, you'll find that there really are no coincidences. These things tend to happen.
I'm trying to do the math here, Charlie. I'm trying to figure out what's more deadly, figuring out this kind of medical thing or working for the Clintons. Because, it really is, working for the Clintons. That's another surefire way to have a kind of a dodgy obituary, right?
Well, at least the doctors start off working on the side of good people, trying to help people. I think that the people working with the Clintons get what they.
What happens? The thing in common here, we're having a laugh and a joke really about something. It's very dark, but the thing in common is that this cult, this cabal that we're up against, be it tentacles in the medical arena or in the political arena. If you become a threat to them in any way, their profit margin or the kind of stuff they're trying to cover up, then it's like false flags. It's their tried and tested kind of methodology. It's their modus operandi. It's suicided in very questionable circumstances, right? Yeah.
And that's how you'll know you're on the right track, when people in your industry start turning up dead for weird reasons. Now, I know a lot of people might sort of say, well, with the vaccines, like, this is crazy. The doctors wouldn't be selling this. They know that, the vaccines are safe. They believe that they're safe. Just remember that there were doctors that were pushing cigarette, they were saying, 4 out of 5 doctors prefer Lucky Strikes. So remember, there was a time when they sold cocaine over the counter, in drugstores in like the 1920s. So for us to think that this couldn't happen, that there couldn't be somebody that that there couldn't be a medical a mistake with regard to a certain substance, in this particular case vaccines. But you just look back on the way smoking was treated and the way smoking was sold to people as harmless and not a problem, and then they put doctors up to give it credibility and things like that. You understand. There's a quote from the CEO of RGR Nabisco. He said, "Cigarette smoking is no more addictive than coffee, tea, or Twinkies." Well, I mean, of course he's going to say that. So let's not forget that there's always there's a lot of money behind it, and when there's a lot of money behind it, people will say or do or validate all sorts of things that maybe they shouldn't do. So.
No, I think you talk about one of these kind of anti-smoking drugs that are out there right now as well, don't you?
Yeah, there's Chantix, a drug that you would take if you want to stop smoking. But if you're looking for something fun to do on the internet, go find the websites or chat rooms that talk about the Chantix side effects. Oh my God, they're hilarious. It is where people go on there and describe their nightmares. I mean, you will crack up because it's horrifying. It's like, great, I'm not smoking anymore. But now every time I close my eyes, I have, visions of, like I'm getting chased by dragons or something, or I'm swimming in slime and I can't, it's just horrifying side effects that are mostly nightmarish. But some of them include rectal bleeding and stuff like that. So, you're thinking, great, what am I trading off here? Yeah, I'm not smoking anymore, but I haven't slept in a month. So.
And, it doesn't matter what the medication or the drug is, when you start looking at the side effects, it kind of cracks me up. It makes me laugh because most of the side effects are the symptoms that make you go to the doctor in the first place. Yeah,
no kidding. They're horrible. I mean, I think that it's fair to say that the scientific community has been hijacked. There's so much money at stake, and I can understand from a business standpoint. I understand that there's a lot of money that's spent on research and development for these particular drugs, and you get a lot of drugs that don't come to market that wind up fizzing out and things like that. So I can understand that they're in a tough industry, but what I can't understand, what I can't justify is when you hear that in 1986, the pharmaceutical industry went to the United States Congress and said, listen, we're getting creamed on these lawsuits for vaccines. We're going to stop doing them. We're going to just stop making them because we're losing money on this. The only way this is going to work for us is if you grant us immunity from lawsuits having to do with vaccines. And somebody went along with that. Enough people went along to that it got passed. So when people say, vaccines can't be that dangerous because you'd hear about all the lawsuits. Oh, you better do your research because they have passed a law that it is illegal to sue drug manufacturers for vaccine damage. They have a thing called VAERS, the vaccine court, that you might go to. And if you win any money from this vaccine court, which is funded by money that you pay for your vaccine, 75 cents from each one goes into this pot. So the pharmaceutical companies aren't even paying it. But if you win, you have to sign a non-disclosure. And if you violate that, they come after you for 10 times what you got from this vaccine court. So let's say you get $1 million and open your big mouth. Now they come after you for $10 million. Oh, and by the way, your kid still has autism and you're living in your car now. So they have made this so that it doesn't get discussed. They've made a lot of these issues, these things like, you're talking about vaccine damage, make it so that people will question you and say, well, listen, if this is a real thing, I would have heard more about it. Well, you understand that they have gone in and rigged the game. It's brilliant from their point of view. I mean, now they've made the vaccines mandatory. They've made it so that there's no legal ramifications for them. They can't be held accountable for anything. Now they don't have to market it because it's mandatory. I mean, if I could make my book mandatory for people to have to buy 74 copies of it like they do vaccines, you'd open it up and it would just be filled with dick jokes. I mean, it would just be nothing. It'd be, haha, sucker. That's basically what we've got in the vaccine world now is you've got no incentive for quality control at the source because there's nothing that can happen to them. So it's a really weird game.
Above the law that this same cabal have set up to protect themselves. And, we've got 15 minutes or so left, and I urge everyone, please check out the book. I've already shamelessly made sure that Charlie will come back sometime in the near future because I love all of this information, and he covers so many topics. But the time we've got left, Charlie, right, what we'll do is we'll kind of go here, there, and everywhere. And just recently, I've been covering this whole kind of the timeline of the Illuminati, of the Cabal, with Duncan Campbell. And then more recently, I had on Walter Bosley, who I understand.
I love him.
Yeah,
I love his stuff. Guys got cool stuff. I think he's, by the way, I think he is doing the most interesting work out there. I think that the whole NIMSA and I just think I find that stuff so fascinating. I wish I knew it well enough to write about it, but I'm content to just read his stuff because he's on it.
See, this is brilliant because, I mean, this is the segue to where I was going to go, because one of the most kind of speculative kind of pieces of info we put out there on the show is to do with Donald Trump and the potential for him and his family to be connected to some kind of other faction within the global elite. And we've seen Donald Trump coming to the fore during the candidacy, and then against all belief, he actually got elected, right? And there was a lot of talk at the time. Is he a good guy? Is he one of the club? I mean, what's your take on that? Do you think, like Walter says, there's possibly some other faction within these global billionaires that they've had enough? And I'm not saying Trump's the main man, the savior, but can you see that being a possibility? He's the front man for this group.
Well, you know what's interesting is something that Walter mentioned, but I heard it earlier, a couple weeks earlier, from Daniel List, a Dark Journalist, talking about John Trump, his uncle, being the person that was tasked with going into Nikola Tesla's apartment after he had died to look for information on certain things, and he had told them, "There's nothing. We've got nothing of military value here." That to me is fascinating because, I mean, if anybody had an idea of what was going on, it appeared to be Nikola Tesla. He was light years ahead on all this stuff. So to hear that and think, well, maybe this John Trump got his hands on that. And then Daniel List took it even further, talking about the picture in 1987 of Trump with Richard Nixon, put in the handwritten note from Richard Nixon saying, "Hey, my wife Pat says if you ever decide to get into politics, she thinks you would become the president," or something like that. Like, who the hell would have thought that guy would become president? I mean, he's a deranged and mentally unstable human.
Right? This is the weird thing, because you can look at Barry Soetoro, Barack Obama, and he allegedly was telling people when he was in college and university, "Hey, I'm going to be the future president of the US." And this is one of this weird kind of out there things. It's almost as if these people know ahead of time what they're going to be in the future.
It's crazy. I love the idea of Donald Trump in his time machine. You think he'd go back and get himself a better hairstyle, but apparently
to Photoshop that. I'll have him hanging out of the TARDIS with Doctor Who by the end of the night. I think it's hilarious. But just recently, I covered this on YouTube over the weekend. He yet again he's talking about some kind of space force. Yeah. Now, I find it like an echo in time almost, because Ronald Reagan, the last open actor that was in the Oval Office, he was the one that talked about the outside threat and how that would bring us all together. And here we are now, a reality actor in the Oval Office, and he's talking all about space forces. And at the same time, we're seeing the mainstream media, one of these arms or tentacles of the global octopus, they've turned their kind of attitude towards the whole UFO scene recently, Charlie. I don't know if you've noticed this, but what do we make of what might be coming down the road? A lot of people that look into conspiracies, they come across Project Bluebeam. A lot of the listeners, they speculate about UFOs. What's your take on all of this that's unfolding right now, man?
Well, I think, first of all, the Elizondo stuff with the To the Stars Academy, I think any ex-CIA, always CIA, I wouldn't trust that guy at all. I don't think that that's disclosure. I'm in favor of disclosure. I believe there are things going on that warrant it. I don't think it's going to come from them. I think that Tom DeLonge is getting played by those guys. I'm not a believer of the To the Stars Academy. However, I am a believer in the secret space program. I'm very much interested in what Catherine Austin Fitts has discovered about HUD, the missing $21 trillion, and what that has gone to fund over the years. It's gone towards quite a bit. I'm I've always been interested in the Gary McKinnon story. And part of the reason why I was interested in the Gary McKinnon story, or felt like he had credibility, was because he said, here's my story, and he told it, and that was it. He never added more to it. He never felt the need to embellish it. He just like, hey, listen.
The way your government was threatening to give him like 70 years hard time.
Yeah. Oh,
they were worried about something, right?
That was a really good indicator that he was onto something. But unlike Corey Goode, who I do not trust, I feel like those guys are, they're always, there's just more. There's like, well, tell us more about your story. Well, then I went back, and then there were blue chickens, and then it just sort of kind of get more and more and more. But with Gary McKinnon, he was saying, listen, I found these non-terrestrial officers. I found names of Navy ships, that USSS, Rothencaller, I forget what the name was, but it was like, that was his story, and then that was the end of it. There was no more to it, and I liked that because it showed like it to me, it was sort of validated that he was like, listen, this is all I've got. I'll tell you everything I've got, but that's all I've got. I think
you've got Catherine, like you say, dealing with the money. You've got Walter. Yep. Who, again, I just stumbled across recently, making a brilliant case for all of this. And then Joseph P. Farrell as well. I mean, when you put all of this together, I mean, I really do think there's a compelling case for a tandem, a parallel civilization living amongst us, but totally separate from us.
I love Joseph P. Farrell. He's just, to me, he's one of the most interesting people out there. I love listening to him talk about these things. And then you take it one step further back, the story of what Wernher von Braun said, on his deathbed with it. Hey, they're going to fake an alien invasion. Now, I know I just said, I don't believe, once a CIA member, always a CIA member. I suppose I have to extend that to once a Nazi, always a Nazi as well. So maybe what Wernher von Braun says, maybe you can discount that by the fact that he was a confirmed Nazi. But I don't know that he was lying about that, because the idea of faking an alien invasion, though it sounds preposterous, we do know we have the technology for it. You did hear Ronald Reagan talking about it, which was kind of weird. You do hear all the presidents going on Jimmy Kimmel and things like that and bringing it up, which is, of course, a very staged event, very scripted in terms of questions and answers. So you have to wonder, what's the agenda? Are they softening us up for this? Has it been happening through the media? Has it been happening through movies? Are we getting, we're already dumbed down. And I have seen that technology that they show, the Magic Leap technology, the video of a humpback whale looking like it's jumping out of the floor of a high school gymnasium. I mean, holy moly, if I saw that, I would freak out too. So perhaps the only way to prevent this potential future alien fake invasion is to just get the word out there that it might be coming. So when it comes, enough people go, oh, yeah, we heard about this. Because
I think it is really important that von Braun was the one that brought this up, because your book goes a long way to showing that these plans that are afoot in the agenda, nothing new. And they're maybe 10, 20, 30, 50 years in advance, sometimes way before the plans come to fruition. But the main players, their own quotes, they show that they know that something is coming in the future. So they know the game. And that's why when von Braun talks about this, the level he was at within the Nazi party, Oh, yeah. I would imagine he really did know how things were going to play out in the future.
My guess is that he would be one of those insiders. I mean, he was the godfather of rocketry. He would know. If anyone would be in the loop, it would be him. Now, I don't know if he decided to grow a conscience on his deathbed. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Maybe he had always worried about stuff like this. Maybe he was a hardcore scientist and hated the political aspects of it all. I don't know.
Or maybe it was just that part of this magical spell that we were talking about. I think it was before the show, where they have to show us, they have to tell us, they have to let us know what's coming. And it's revelation of the method, foreshadowing, so many ways you can look at this, but there's a magical element to all of this. And it's a dark cabal at the heart of this octopus, isn't it?
It really is. And it's hard for us as decent, normal, loving human beings to fully understand that, to put yourself in this position, because we just wouldn't think of that. It wouldn't be a consideration for us. We wouldn't act this way. We couldn't stand to do that to other people. But there is some sort of they have some sort of cosmic or karmic philosophy that they follow, like we talked about a little bit earlier, was that they need to tell you what they're going to do before they do it, and then that absolves them of their guilt, and that becomes sort of the karma's on you. Like, hey, listen, we told you we were going to run this play, and you didn't stop it, so that's kind of on you guys now. So I don't understand that. I don't subscribe to that. I mean, I don't live my life like that, so I can't understand that. But it doesn't matter if I believe it. They believe it. That's what really matters, is that they act as if they act this way. They tell you what they're going to do, and they will allow you to walk into it. And if you do nothing to stop them, then they feel like, well, you know, you shouldn't be such a sheep then. You know, you should have known I was lying to you. So that's what I discovered. But I also end the book in a very positive way, and that is to remind everybody that we have control. We do. We've been taught to believe we don't, but we do have the ability to wake up. We do have the ability. We have the numbers. We can say no more to this. We're not doing this. It's okay to say no. It's okay to tell these people we're not playing this game anymore, and we're on to you. And we're going to put you in prison, and we're going to stand up to you.
This is brilliant because, Charlie, there was something in the chat room. Lynn was saying earlier on, you know, are we winning? Do we win? And that's the thing. They've actually made it so that we don't realize right now the position we're in. And I honestly believe with thousands listening to this show and all of the other shows, not only on this network, other networks, authors like you out there, that's the big realization. That's the hidden truth, that we are already winning. The fact that we are thinking for ourselves, whether we are absolutely polarized on some topics or not, at least we're thinking for ourselves. And sure. They hate the thought of free-minded thinkers. That's what scares them the most, I think. It really is.
Well, and we've all gone to the grocery store, and we've seen some people that you probably don't want to be free thinkers, that maybe are bad decision makers in general. And you go,
have you been looking on Google Earth on my street? Is that what it is, man? You've been looking where I live again, haven't you?
Well, you see Black Friday here in the States, which is the Friday after Thanksgiving, where everyone lines up at 4 a.m. to barge down the doors of a Walmart to get a $3 can opener, and you just shake your head and you go, well, maybe we're getting exactly what we deserve. Maybe they have no respect for us because maybe we aren't showing them, we aren't acting in a way that gives them a reason to respect us, and maybe we need to step away from them.
Yeah, I got a good friend. He calls that the annual running of the sheeple.
That's exactly what it is. In Barcelona, they have the running of the bulls. In the United States, we have the running of the sheep. It's embarrassing, frankly.
Charlie, I've really enjoyed this tonight. You know, it's almost been like a guilty pleasure. I forgot we've been doing a show at some point. It's just the kind of stuff that we all love to talk about. Now, have you got any kind of pokers in the fire? Any new books planned? Your middle of the night writing sessions?
You know what's funny is that I've only heard one person bring this topic up, and it was you. And it was an idea that I wanted to write, and I said, I'll get killed if I write this book. But I really want to write a book about the Space Shuttle Challenger astronauts. I want to know why they're all alive. I want to know why they're teaching in colleges. I'm not going to write that book though because I value my safety. But I heard you talking about it, and I was like, oh my God, this guy's on my same wavelength.
It's a bit like 9/11, you know. I think about 12 or 16 of those turned up alive in the days after they'd been accused of it. Yeah. It's funny how these things work. It really is. And you know that's a very strange one, and one that leaves me scratching my head to this day. Mm-hmm. But Charlie, I look forward to you coming back in the near future, man, because this has been great. And it's the kind of show that we can all use to allow other people to expand their minds, just get them thinking a little bit differently about the stuff that they thought they knew about. And if you check out this book, there really is something for everyone. Not all of the topics will resonate with everyone, but that's the way it is in real life. You know, with all of our topics, we kind of gravitate towards, and that's the ones we really dig down deep on. And we've all got our kind of niche subjects. I love doing CERN, the science, that kind of thing. But in this book, it really is. It's covered all the bases, all the tentacles of the Octopus of Global Control. So for another night, wherever you are, make it TFR Denny, that dial.